Hello everyone, I'm here to discuss with you how the media's portrayal and presentation of suffering in the Vietnam War impacted the United States and its pre-war state of nationalism, and how it was after the Americans left Vietnam. So before we begin, I just want to get into a couple of things. Firstly, due to the nature of this subject, there will be depictions and discussions about the side of suffering in this video, so here's your trigger warning. So for those who do not wish to engage with the topic, please leave now. Secondly, to discuss the impact of nationalism, we must first establish what nationalism is. So, Professor of History at the City of University of New York describes it as nationalism is the ideology based on the premise that the individual's loyalty and devotion to the nation state surpass other individual or group interests. So, this is important to remember throughout the rest of the video. Thirdly, it's important to understand why the Vietnam War was so unique. The rapid update of communication technology and mass integration of television sets around the US, for the first and last time, made for the uncensored battlefield being streamed to US families. As Young and Buzanko describe in the companion to the Vietnam War, as the first time the public experienced the uncensored horrors of war and the sights of suffering presented. So, the foundation and how suffering relates to US nationalism. Hall and Mazovich made an argument in their text Nationalism and War, saying, wars are crucial for nationalism as their tragic experience creates shared collective meanings that bind diverse citizenry into a single nation. In regards to the Vietnam War, I don't think this could be more wrong. The candid reporting of war and the lack of censorship from the government led to the downfall of the previously strong sense of patriotism previously encouraged by post-World War II efforts by the US. I personally believe that the tragic experience does create collective meanings within a nation. However, wars are not a crucial part of this process. In fact, I believe wars have the opposite effect, creating a sense of guilt and remorse to one's own nation, especially when seeing the suffering caused by one side. So how nationalism was. For the United States, the post-World War II national cohesion was America's most potent military asset. The collective sacrifice made by the people of America, developed by the US government, provided the American people with loyalty and a sense of heroism towards their nation. However, this changed drastically with the media's portrayal of suffering in the Vietnam War and the US troops' causation of such suffering. The media presentation of the enemy's suffering made it hard for the domestic government to stigmatize them, quickly degrading the US citizens' own sense of heroism and loyalty in war. As the war continued, and so the streaming and suffering back home, there became an inevitable domestic disturbance, with many wondering why America had a right being there in the first place.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor, hungry people in the mud for big, powerful America and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. What I'm going to shoot them for what? How am I going to shoot them? Them little poor little black people, little babies and children and women. How can I shoot them poor people? I would just take me to jail.
Even the CIA saying in the implications of an unfavorable outcome in Vietnam, any honest and dispassionate analysis must conclude that if the US accepts failure in Vietnam, it will pay some price in the form of new risks which in success would preclude. In the case of Vietnam, there does not seem to be a common denominator which permits such eventual risks to be measured reliably against the obvious and immediate costs of continuing the war. So, let's discuss why people choose to view the side of suffering and the ethical implications of it. Although the reporting of war images of people suffering caused a major impact to the mass psychological positioning of the American people, was filming and presenting these scenes without censorship ethical? Remen and others in Who Watches the ISIS Beheading and Why argue the findings from this study suggest that when individuals are afraid of the horrific acts of violence occurring in the world, they may be drawn to the graphic coverage of these types of events, which may only exacerbate their fears. This argument presents the belief that people only view graphic coverage of events out of self-projection of their fear of such violence. However, I don't necessarily agree with this. I believe James Natchway presented it best when asked about the ethics behind his war photography.
If war is an attempt to negate humanity, then photography can be perceived as the opposite of war. And if it's used well, it can be a powerful ingredient in the antidote to war.
I agree with this statement. I believe that some people do view graphic content under the pretense of fear. However, I believe this is too unambiguous. I believe that people view the side of suffering as either a way of inspiration or education. Within reference to the presentation of the side of suffering during the Vietnam War by domestic America, I believe it did just that. The suffering presented by journalists during that time educated Americans. mitigating the nationalistic mirage of heroism previously mentioned, whilst also inspiring them to exercise their rights as free people and do their part to try and or mitigate said suffering. To further prove this argument, I interviewed 10 people aged between 18 and 45 about specific sites of suffering captured from the Vietnam War. Here's what the layout looked like. The results showed that although the imagery made people feel negative emotions, most would continue to see images like this under the pretenses of feelings such as obligations or believing it is necessary to understand how others are or were being treated. So to summarize, I believe it is important to further investigate how media and their portrayal of suffering can impact people, especially on a mass scale. This is worthwhile to understand for everyone, but especially for those who will be working in any form of media who have control over the release, publication, and commenting of potentially traumatic material. To finish, I'd like to draw a link between the media's portrayal of the Vietnam War and the recent Israeli-Palestine conflict. Although the conflict has been happening since 1948, I personally believe that the most recent escalations in the conflict's media coverage showed a lot more uncensored sites of suffering than previously. Due to the modern forms of instantaneous communication, these sites of suffering traveled all over social media and traditional media alike. These sites of suffering inspired more action to be taken, whether in protest, donation, or education in relation to the conflict. However, most of the time these images came with very obvious trigger warnings, which came from either the social media sites or the news outlets, preventing people from viewing the graphic imagery against their consent. I believe this is a beneficial way of presenting sites of suffering, allowing those who may be impacted by the viewing to choose not to view, but not mitigating or preventing imagery which can communicate, educate, and inspire to those willing to view the images. Thank you.